As I prepare to transition to a new home as part of my departure from this church, as I will bid you farewell, I've been doing a lot of thinking about some of the stuff that I've accumulated. And I'm here in the storage room at the church because I look around and it reminds me of just how easily stuff can begin to kind of clutter up my life. There's quite a bit of stuff in here, and actually it's been slimmed down, but the reality is there's still quite a bit in this storage room. Now, it's stuff we use, it's stuff we have purpose for, but there's still a lot of stuff. And as I've been preparing and looking through my belongings at home, I started thinking, man, do I really need this? Like, can I get on without having this thing, whatever it may be? And it just so happens that apparently I can. I know, who knew? I have gotten rid of quite a bit of things, quite a bit of my stuff as I've prepared for this. And I thought it was going to be hard. I thought there was going to be a lot of stuff that I'm like, well, I have some sentimental value to this. It's really important to me. But as I've released some of those things that I thought were so critical to who I was, there's been sort of a freeing feeling of that, hey, I'm no less of who I am because that thing is no longer in my life. Phyllis Tickle, I'm not as familiar with this particular author in our Christian faith, but she once commented that every 500 years or so, the church sort of goes through a rummage sale of its own. It kind of begins to take stock of its own spirituality, its own practices, its own identity, and begins to pick apart the pieces. Begins to re-examine itself and say, is this really all essential to who we are, or is there a new way to express this timeless truth of the gospel in a way that begins to communicate it and applies to those around us? I think that's what's so beautiful about God, is that even as He is unchanging, He's always doing something new in our midst. And I think we're at a point and we can, I think, agree with this, that the church as it was is not going to be the church that we will see in time. And that's okay. But part of that inquires of us, what is it that we're holding on to that might be cluttering up the message of the gospel? This past Sunday, as we looked at Acts 8 and Philip meeting this Ethiopian eunuch along that road from Jerusalem to Gaza, I think it should strike us that God, I think, is perpetually, really, at some level, asking us, is it time to do something different? Is it time to let go of that stuff so we can do this thing that I'm trying to get you to? And the more I sit with that question in my mind, the more I wonder, how often have I missed out on something amazing that God's doing because I'm clinging to something else over here, whether it's my own way of thinking or my perception of something or whatever it may be. I mean, we can insert all sorts of stuff there. And that's not to say that some of the things we are doing are necessarily inherently bad. I don't necessarily think that either. But at the same time, if we want to be reaching new people to sit beside and guide them, like we talked about this past week, sometimes things have to kind of get out of the way. Remember, Philip had to get out of the way of the fact that this was not only a foreigner, but it was someone that Deuteronomy 23 specifically said, do not let the eunuchs in the presence of God's assembly. He had to get out of that mindset. He had to get rid of that clutter to be able to share the good news of the gospel. And when he did, look what happened. This man was baptized. Not only did he begin to understand the message of the gospel, but he responded to it and received God's grace through the baptism of water right then and there. He wasn't even willing to wait for Sunday morning service. I mean, he wanted it right then and there, and that's amazing. But that's only because he let those things get out of the way. Folks, what is it that we are clinging to? What is it that we hold this sentimental value toward that may be hindering us from doing something amazingly new with God's help? We could clean out this closet, and there might be all sorts of other things we could come up with. There might be all sorts of new ideas, new dreams that could be done with this space. And I'm not suggesting this is the actual thing we need to focus on, but consider this image to the metaphor for what we might need to consider right now. What are some of the things that are just taking up space that we could get rid of and transition that energy towards something new that God is doing in our midst? I I think that's the message of the gospel at some level. We talk about the renewal of the self. Paul talks about taking off the old self in sin and death and putting on the new self in Jesus Christ. That's that individual level of what God is doing. But reality is God is doing something bigger than that. God is seeking for the whole world to be redeemed to himself. We get to be a part of that as individuals. So what he's doing on that micro level in us as individuals does something at a larger level when it's all working together with God. So folks, what are some of the things we might need to find at the churchyard sale in a month, 2 months, in a year that's going to allow God to do something new here? Hope you have a great week.